Good afternoon, everybody. Today I will be discussing the concepts of absolute and relative poverty, how these concepts shape people's lives, their implications, and why really understanding these concepts is super important in modern society. I'll also be sharing real world examples from music that I think vividly illustrates the ideas and emotions behind being in these conditions. To start, I'm going to begin with absolute poverty. Now, absolute poverty is defined as a condition where individuals or households lack the financial resources to meet the most basic necessities of life. Things like food, shelter, clean water, healthcare, and clothing is an example of basic necessities. This measure is consistent across countries and time periods because it reflects universal survival needs. Now, universal survival needs are the basic necessities required for human life and survival, regardless of a person's location or culture. For example, the World Bank set a benchmark of living on less than $2.15 a day to be considered living in absolute poverty, which is actually used to measure extreme poverty around the entire globe as well. So next up is relative poverty. Now, relative poverty, on the other hand, is defined within the context of a specific society, not so much on a larger scale, but on a smaller scale. It occurs when an individual earns significantly less than the average income of their community or society, making it difficult to maintain the standard of living in their community. Unlike absolute poverty, relative poverty is dynamic. It changes over time and depends on the societal wealth and income distribution of that society at that time. For example, someone in a wealthy nation like the United States may not lack basic survival needs, but could still face challenges affording housing, healthcare, or even education. This highlights how poverty is not just about survival, but also about dignity, inclusion, and the ability to live a fulfilling life surrounded by your community. I'm now going to be sharing some personal experiences that I've faced that relate to relative poverty more specifically. During my time in college, like I know a lot of people have also dealt with, is working multiple jobs to cover tuition and rent. This also meant that I had to sacrifice my well-being. So I had to skip meals to save money, losing sleep to stay on top of my responsibilities and my homework. And I know a lot of people have faced similar circumstances, specifically in their time in college, which unfortunately happens a lot more than we think it does. These experiences illustrate how relative poverty can exist even in prosperous regions, emphasizing its multi-faced nature and deep ties to economic systems and social structures. There have been times where my roommates went to go out to do something fun or go out to eat, or there was an event and I had to stay behind because I had to save money. And being in that position over and over and over again definitely had its toll on me mentally and emotionally. My first example for the concept of absolute and relative poverty is a song, which I'm sure many of you have heard of or heard of the artist. The song is Another Day in Paradise by Phil Collins. This song powerfully depicts absolute and relative poverty through the story of a homeless woman who's seeking help. In the lyrics, Collins writes, she calls out to the man on the street, "Sir, can you help me?" To me, this captures vulnerability and desperation. The man's indifference is expressed in Collins' lyrics when he says, he pretends he can't hear her, which reflects societal apathy. The song illustrates the absolute poverty and the woman's lack of basic necessities and the dependence of strangers for survival. It highlights relative poverty by contrasting her struggles with the comfort of others, as expressed in the refrain, "It's just another day for you and me in paradise." This juxtaposition challenges listeners to confront their privilege and systematic inequalities that perpetrate poverty. When I first heard this song, I didn't understand the true meaning behind the lyrics until I was a little bit older. When I listened to the song while writing my paper, it really got to me and my emotions because I feel like it really expressed what it feels like to be in that struggle, to be in that condition, to have to beg strangers to help you when you're in need, and to rely on that, and to be treated as if you're invisible is really difficult to deal with on a daily basis. My second example that I chose to represent my concepts is the song "If There's a God in Heaven, What's He Waiting For" by Elton John. It wasn't up until I started doing this project that I actually listened to this song, and Elton John is one of my favorite artists. I've seen him in concert. But the song addresses both absolute poverty and inequality that a lot of nations face. For instance, when Elton John sings the lyrics, "South America stole her children," he's not talking about the physical loss of children, he's talking about the loss of their futures and their opportunities that they're not going to be able to have because of their vulnerable conditions that not only are they facing, but the entire population of their nation. And it talks about the harsh realities faced in these nations and how the entire population is struggling to meet the basic needs of survival. The song talks about how the lives of the rich and the poor are so different, and it emphasizes the inequalities that sustain such economic disparity. And when Elton John repeats the phrase, "If there's a God in heaven, what's he waiting for?" it critiques both divine inaction and societal apathy, and it calls for urgent attention to these issues. To conclude this presentation, I'm going to be discussing why these concepts matter. Understanding absolute and relative poverty is super important because these concepts reveal the deep inequalities that are shaping our world. Absolute poverty underscores urgent, life-threatening challenges, while relative poverty highlights exclusions and inequality, even in wealthier societies around the world. Both concepts emphasize that poverty is not only about survival, but also about dignity and feeling included. By understanding these ideas, we can develop policies to reduce these inequalities and to promote social justice and to create a more equitable and inclusive world for everybody that's living in it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this presentation has deepened your understanding of poverty and its impact on individuals and societies. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again.